I'm Susan McGinnis with Clean Skies News. The EPA is considering new regulations for cement manufacturers that would establish new national emission standards for hazardous pollutants under the Clean Air Act. Well, a new study by Southern Methodist University looks at the economic implications of the EPA's proposed rule, what that might mean for the cement industry. Dr. Bernard Weinstein is author of the study. He is an associate director of the Maguire Energy Institute at SMU's Cox School of Business. Bud, thanks so much for coming in.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
Now, when you're going to talk about this study, tell us first where this rule stands now. The EPA wants to propose these national standards.
Well, the rule was promulgated some time ago, and they're supposed to issue their final rule on, I believe it's in June or July of this year. The industry is very concerned about the rule as it's presently written. We did an analysis to assess what the economic impact of this rule could be, and our conclusion is that if the rule is approved as proposed, it could have a serious economic impact, not only on the industry, but on the entire U.S. economy.
Now, you looked at the cost, you looked at jobs, you looked at possible businesses shutting down, moving overseas. Tell us a little bit about what this would cost the cement industry, in your opinion.
Well, there are really three issues here. Number one is the higher costs that would be associated with complying with these new proposed rules. In fact, the costs could conceivably be so high that a number of cement kilns would actually shut down. In that event, of course, we'd be importing more cement. We currently import about 25% of the cement that's used in the United States. That could easily go up to 30%. It would increase imports. Increase imports, and of course that means the loss of U.S. jobs.
Does EPA have an estimate of U.S. cement plants closing under this rule?
They haven't come up with an estimate of the number of plants, although even EPA has said in their analysis that we're looking at $350 to $400 million of negative economic impact if this rule is adopted.
Also, you looked at the effects on particular projects that had stimulus funds attached to them.
Well, here's our concern. We're trying to revive the economy in part by spending money on infrastructure.
And that cement is the basis of
infrastructure uses a lot of concrete, of which cement is the key ingredient. To the extent that this rule inflates the cost of concrete, those stimulus dollars aren't going to go nearly as far.
Now, you've done economic development projects in China, India, Thailand, Mexico. Tell us about what happens elsewhere in the world. I mean, is there any future for these kind of regulations happening elsewhere? I mean, if these businesses and industries move overseas, maybe our emissions targets might be met, but the global ones will not.
Well, you bring up a very good point. We can apply our rules here, and that could result in the closure of plants, and all that does is shift production offshore. And other countries, like China, which is the world's largest cement manufacturing nation, they just don't have the same types of environmental controls that we do. So in a sense, while we might, we achieve, let's say, better emissions here in the U.S., to the extent that we're shifting production overseas on a global scale, we could actually be increasing emissions.
Well, here's what EPA says. Cement kilns are the fourth biggest source of atmospheric mercury. Cutting emissions from cement plants would prevent 1,600 deaths a year and cut $11 billion in healthcare costs. That's significant.
Well, I can't comment on that study. I don't know what assumptions they made. Our study was not a cost-benefit analysis. Our study was an economic impact assessment. I think one has to be very leery about these types of studies that try to talk about costs and benefits, and if we spend X dollars we're going to save Y number of jobs. I think the methodologies behind those studies need to be examined very carefully.
Well, here's what else the EPA says, that the cement industry wants what it calls reclassification or subcategories created that would hold higher emissions plants to less strict regulations, and EPA says it's met with industry representatives about this and it didn't feel any arguments strong enough to support this sort of subcategorization.
Well, I don't know what EPA is saying. I do know that the industry has been negotiating with EPA and wants to have some variability, some flexibility in these rules for a number of reasons. The primary ingredient in making cement is limestone. Well, you get tremendous variations of these trace elements in limestone, even within one quarry, and to try to have a fixed standard for a number of different pollutants that would apply to every cement kiln and every quarry would be extremely difficult to implement.
Has EPA responded to that?
I don't know. You'd have to ask people in the industry.
But the general drift is the EPA wants the industry to use the best technology to control the mercury. I mean,
Well, the way the EPA MACT standards work is that, at least historically, is that whatever industry they're talking about, they want that industry to use the maximum available control technology that is achievable in practice. And that's what the industry is concerned about. There hasn't been any testing. They don't know whether these new proposals are achievable in practice, or at least achievable at a reasonable cost that won't bankrupt the industry.
So the industry doesn't want these national standards, this new rule. What is your alternative? Are you guys proposing something?
Well, again, you need to talk to the industry people in terms of the specific proposals that they're putting forth to the EPA. My understanding is they want some flexibility. They don't want every single kiln to have to adhere to a fixed standard for 4 or 5 different pollutants.
So rework that rule to make it more amenable to different kinds
to
of cement
regional
plants that
variations.
have different amounts of basically limestone?
That's my understanding.
Okay. So what are you figuring might be the outcome of this?
Well, that's hard to say. I mean, I would hope that the EPA will modify its proposed rule in a way that, number one, keeps the industry alive and healthy. Number two, keeps us healthy. I mean, the cement industry is heavily regulated right now. It's not as though there aren't any controls on emissions. There are federal and state and local regulations. I think the industry is trying very hard to work out a compromise with the EPA to both improve the economic health of the cement industry and to improve the health of the American public.
All right, well, we'll certainly keep following the developments there. Bud Weinstein from SMU. And we can see this study on your website? It's
on our website, and I presume it will be on the website of the Portland Cement Association and other organizations.
Okay, great. Bud, thanks so much for coming in.
You bet. My pleasure.
We appreciate your insight. And I'm Susan McGinnis with Clean Skies News.